life and circumstances are open to interpretation, and we get to look at the power of being alert to our interpretations. And before we get started, let's just take a minute or two to get present and centered. So let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vitality and life into every portion of your body. And as you exhale, exhale any tension, any stress. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose. Hold it, and this time imagine sparkling, brilliant, bright light just electrifying and enlightening every electron, every molecule and proton, every part of your being and beyond. And as you exhale, exhale any stress, any remaining tension, roll your shoulders. And now let's just press our palms together and softly rub your fingers against your palms and feel how wonderful and delicious that sensation is, that tickling and tingling, and allow it to bring you present into your body right here, right now. Welcome, welcome. It's Friday. And this week we've been talking about wonder and the life as metaphor and contexts. And so I thought, let's talk about interpretation and let's realize how we interpret the signs and signals. Hello, Rosalind. Welcome, welcome. And from California. Wow, you're up early. So I'm honored to have you here with us. That's wonderful. And so Rosalind says TGIF. So interpretation. Um, we know that means thank God it's Friday, but or thank goodness it's Friday, but maybe we could be interpreting that symbol differently. I know that the word fear is often, I've heard it as an acronym for false. I'm not sure what the E stands for, but we'll say false embodiment appearing real, or false something appearing real. Good morning, Dido. I know it's really early where you are as well, so I so appreciate your being here with us. So we're talking about interpretation, and another way of looking at interpretation is looking at the meaning that we ascribe to things. And really what we're looking at is bringing the process of ascribing that meaning or interpretation to experiences and circumstances, bringing that action of ascribing that meaning or interpretation to conscious awareness. And we want to bring it to conscious awareness so that we then have some choice in the matter. So when somebody says or does something, I have a choice as to what to make it mean. Let's say somebody, I say, good morning, how are you, to somebody, and they just sort of gruffly go, or grumble at me in some way or another. I can make that mean something, that I can make that mean something about them. I can make it mean something about me. I can make it mean they don't like me. I can make it mean they are angry at me. I could make it mean they didn't hear me. They're having a bad day. I could make it mean, or I could interpret that grumble in any number of different ways. And what we want to look at is, first of all, what our predispositions are as far as our interpretations. Some of us are predisposed to interpreting things as negative, or as maybe personal slurs or attacks, or just to interpret something personally, where most often the things that we're interpreting and taking personally are things that really don't have anything to do with us. They have to do with the other person. And so here's an interesting scenario. Okay, so I was recently talking with a client who was running through a spate of what they were experiencing as obstructions or obstacles. And someone very close to them had been experiencing these blocks, in progress on sort of a regular basis, and had interpreted these things to say that they had their own personal I demon, they said, I think, but like a negative energy that was following them around, this little black cloud, and obstructing their path at every turn. That was their interpretation. And so here's the thing too, is interpretation breeds expectation, right? So thing after thing after thing was happening, and so they were coming to expect that that's what was going to happen, and it did continue anyway. So the client was saying that they inherited this person's demon, and that they felt like they were at the effect of this energy that was not their own and was obstructing them over and over and over. And so that's an interpretation. And I know that there are all different kinds of energies, and uh, I'm not saying that they don't exist in some way or another, where we might be at the effect of them in some way or another. But we give these stories, whether they're true or not, we give these stories life in some way or another by affirming them, and then projecting them forward into an expectation. Hello, Isabel. Welcome. So good to see you here with us. We're talking about interpretation. So I think one of the biggest things that we do with this interpretation is we create stories about ourselves. And we find evidence to validate our beliefs, and that's what we sort for. So recently I've been thinking about getting a camper van, or getting a van and building it out as a camper van, although I don't know how I would do that, because at the moment I don't have any skills or I don't have the requisite skills or knowledge to do that. And maybe not even the physical strength to do that. I don't know, but it wouldn't stop me. Potentially I would find someone to help me with it or whatever. But so since I've been thinking about this whole camper van, I am noticing all these utility vans that are on the road, and it's as if there are fleets and fleets and fleets of them that just recently have appeared on the road. Well, the fact is that I wasn't tuned into that before, so I just didn't notice what was there. It's not that there are more of them now, it's just that they have a greater presence in my awareness. So what I'm saying here is that I have now a certain context, or a certain openness or awareness of something, and they're now everywhere. And that's because I have this awareness that I am now projecting outward, and I'm sorting for things that fulfill that awareness without consciously saying, oh, I'm going to go look for these utility vans. But, they're everywhere. And Rosalind says, VW makes one called a Wingham. I'll check it out. So it's interesting how with our beliefs and our ideas and our contexts and our predispositions, we look for validation. We think that we're rational and reasonable in making our beliefs, but the truth of it is that we have a belief, and then once we have a belief, however it gets formed, we look for validation of that belief rather than coming to our beliefs and our context based on reason, which is what we tend to think we are doing. In fact, we just look for, what do we call it? We call it confirmation bias. So we hold these proclivities or whatever, and then we look for, or we are alert to things that confirm that belief. And so interpretation, I think now that I'm talking about confirmation bias, it occurs to me that when we're looking for news in our world, in our environment, what we tend to pay attention to are the things that resonate with what we already believe. And so, especially with news, it's probably a good idea for us all to seek out information deliberately that contradicts our foundational idea or belief so that we can maybe broaden our interpretation or broaden our awareness, broaden our perspective. Although we're still listening with the bias that we have, I'm thinking about how in this quest for awakening that so many of us are engaged in, one of the keys is to be less anchored to beliefs and identities. And so one of the things that we were talking about this week is expanding to include, expanding our awareness. So expanding our perspectives and realizing that we can encompass all of it. The interesting thing about trying to hold multiple perspectives at one time is that we become somewhat unmoored. And there is one of the things that we've talked about this week is embracing the unknown. And it's in being present to the unknown, and it's in that unmooring somehow. And this is a paradox, but it's in that unmooring somehow that we can find ourselves, our place back to our center and our clarity in our hearts. And through that, have a sense of knowing that is beyond position, that is beyond right or wrong, to have a sense of presence and knowing that isn't based on polarities, that is somehow inclusive. And I realize I'm talking in an abstract here, but I think if you meditate, perhaps you've come to that place of presence where the right and wrong aspect of things shifts, and the interpretation of those circumstances and of those polarities also shifts as being much less relevant. And so we're going into a holiday season, right? And holidays are so stressful for so many people. where we get into family dynamics and we get triggered from, it's so interesting. I don't think it matters how old you are. If you walk back into family circumstances, it's easy to get triggered into the kinds of patterns from growing up, right? And I've heard so many people just recount these kinds of situations where, you might be very established in your life and your career, and you go back home and all of a sudden you're 12 again, and the dynamic is as if you were a kid. And it's interesting how our lens of interpretation can shift based on our environment, right? So the lens of interpretation, walking back into a family situation, might be reverting to one where there's this very established dynamic. It's almost like walking into an existing structure that anchors you into a past sort of vibe, of frequency, behavior. I don't know if you experience that, but it's interesting to see how we could interpret the same words and the same tonality, the same sentiment from a friend versus a family member. And it could be exactly the same information, but how we might interpret it is that we add all this extra meaning onto it. Like what the underlying conversation, or we add our belief about this other person's intentions or expectations into our understanding and our listening of what they're communicating with us. So I think that it can be an interesting thing to play with. I heard of another altercation with someone with a family member, and what happened was something was spoken. The family member reacted with anger and left the situation. And in follow-up, the person who had spoken checked in with the family member. It turned out that the family member misheard what had been spoken and reacted to that. And the interpretation was something that created disruption in their relationship, right? It's like the person who misheard interpreted that the other person was being confrontational and had said something derogatory and reacted to that, and the underlying interpretation was driven by a sense of deep insecurity and an expectation of animosity or opposition. And I can speak about a situation for myself where, with a family member who has different political views than I have, I've tried to engage in conversation to understand more of the perspective so that I can hopefully broaden my awareness and compassion for some of the dynamics that are going on in our culture right now. And every time we would get into this conversation, this other person would get snippy and kind of angry and somewhat mean. And finally, rather than making it about me or making it about what they thought of me or how they were, rather than trying to figure it out and interpret it myself, I finally said, what's up with that? Why is it that every time we have this conversation, you get angry? And what they said is that they just get upset. So I could have interpreted this as something about me, or something about them in relation to me, or something about them. And really, rather than interpreting or trying to interpret, I was able to ask, what is going on here? What is this? I've seen this dynamic over and over, and I just want to understand what's going on. And I was a breakthrough. It was a breakthrough for both of us, because I had allowed that person to be better heard. It allowed me to understand more of what the dynamic was. And so with these interpretations, when we bring our awareness to the fact that we're making these interpretations, then we can actually try to get to the heart of it, or try to clarify, not within our own little sphere, but try and get clarification from external sources too, which is, in some cases, obviously it's not possible, but in the example that I gave you, it wasn't. And in a lot of family dynamics, it's possible to get clarification, or to attempt to, at least, right? But as we recognize that our interpretations are our own manufactured story, then we have greater inroads to being able to transform them, and to calibrate maybe more closely to what's really there. So how about you? How about you? What do you notice about interpretations? Because we were talking about signs and symbols, and essentially feedback yesterday. Signs and symbols, we interpret them, right? So if I just remembered as a kid, there was a poem, or just this crazy thing that was, step on a crack, break your mother's back. It was a weird thing. So this was on the sidewalk. You weren't supposed to step on the cracks in the sidewalk, because it would bring down misery, obviously, and physical harm to your mom. And imagine, I mean, what a crazy thing to be bringing up kids with. I'm hoping that that's not there these days, and I wonder where the origin was. But these are interpretations. So we create these symbols and representations of things, and then we live within the context of those representations and interpretations. Hello, Irma. So glad to have you here. Wow, that's awesome. Welcome. I'm talking about interpretation and meaning, and the way that we create our experience based on the interpretations that we have. So for instance, if we're having feelings about certain things, we then can be making up stories about what that means about us. Like we can interpret the experience of fear, for instance, and say, well, that means, I'm interpreting that means that I am that I'm wrong for experiencing fear, or I'm making meaning to my experiences. I'm creating interpretations that then I live into, whether they're positive or negative or neutral or whatever. Maybe it's just a whole different context. So let's say I felt somebody recently in our chats here was talking about how they had been really joyful about a pregnancy that they were experiencing, and they were really joyful and celebratory, and another member of the family was very angry at them for expressing their joy because there had been another member of the family who lost a pregnancy. And so the person who got angry was interpreting that the joyfulness of one person's pregnancy was not worthy because another person was experiencing sorrow. So there was judgment and interpretation on the part of that, the in this case it was an uncle who was judging the woman who was so excited about her pregnancy, and created a place of guilt and shame that he was projecting onto this happily pregnant woman because of his interpretation, his interpretation saying that, her joy was harmful to this other person. And we get to be alert to how we interpret events and how we impose our interpretations, not only on ourselves, but on others. His interpretation was that the joyfully pregnant woman was being selfish. And, when there's an interpretation of selfishness, there's maybe anger or resentment that goes with that. When we make interpretations about ourselves, like, I don't have the right to feel joyful in this situation because somebody else is miserable. That's an interpretation of a situation that is really not life affirming for anybody. It's not life affirming for you being joyful, and it's not life affirming for the person you're trying to shield from your joy, right? Because you can't fully be there with them. I mean, maybe you don't want to be dancing and singing at a funeral, although there are people that celebrate people's passing in that way. It's all about interpretation. And when we look at the experiences of our lives, the way that we choose to interpret them is the way that we create a context for ourselves. And so it's our job and our responsibility to interpret things and to create contexts that forward the action, that are life affirming, that are generative. And the first step is to start noticing the interpretations. And one of the biggest areas of interpretation is in an area of self-judgment. So we make up stories about ourselves and our behaviors and our circumstances and our feelings and our thoughts. We not only have the thoughts and the feelings, but then we start making stories up around them and interpret these things in broader contexts that then we are, we're building out into this reality matrix that we live in. So being alert to our interpretations gives us an inroad into becoming more active, conscious creators in our lives. And we get to choose interpretations and meanings that move us into a place of greater expression and greater life, greater vitality. And we're not conditioned that way. So it takes a deliberate act of attention and will to move into a place of noticing first, and then choosing over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, choosing the thought, the emotion, the action, the interpretation that nourishes us and that is bringing us into greater vitality and greater expression. So let's look at our interpretations. Let's look at how we can design them in such a way. Well, first of all, let's look at how we can design them. And let's look at how we can design them in such a way that they feed us rather than starve us, that they nourish us and enliven us rather than dampening us. So here's to life. Here's to life and vitality and interpretations that bring us greater lightness and greater appreciation and joy. And so that's it for today. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection. And I'm here going live on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page every weekday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern. And I invite you to check out the really lovely, beautiful, heartfelt, sharing and programming that is on Enlightened World Network over the weekend, especially. There's all kinds of great stuff, as always. And Rosalind, you're welcome. I'm so glad to have you here, and Dido and Irma and Isabel and everybody else who's joining us. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. And till next time, lots and lots and lots of love.